My name is Vera Lang. At least, that's what they know me as now. In another life, a louder one, I was Vivian Carter, daughter of Senator Robert Carter, graduate of Yale Law, invisible guest at my own family's table. I once handed my father a photo from the day I graduated law school. He didn't even look at it, just passed it to his assistant like it was an obligation. A political handshake in a mahogany frame. That was the moment I realized I wasn't family. I was a press release they hadn't drafted yet. For years, I thought silence made me dignified, that staying composed would earn me a seat, but silence only taught them how to disappear me. So I left. I drove to a town no one cared to find on a map, Claremont, rented the room above a bookstore, filed myself under nobody. And for a while, that anonymity felt like healing. But the truth doesn't sleep. It sits quietly in your chest like a draft unsent, until someone lies with your name. Then it wakes up. They called me dramatic. They deep-faked my voice. They tried to bury me under distortion. What they didn't know was that I never stopped writing. And I kept the receipts. This isn't a story about reclaiming a title. It's about reclaiming the truth. Word by word, frame by frame. Because when your name becomes a weapon, sometimes, you have to build a new one that cuts deeper. He took the frame with a practiced politeness, like a senator handed a baby he didn't want to kiss. I watched as his fingers curled around the mahogany edge, perfectly manicured nails pressing into the lacquered finish. Then, with a nod that barely acknowledged my existence, he handed the photo to his assistant and turned away, just in time to raise a glass toward Brandon. To the future of the Carter legacy, he beamed. A scattering of applause echoed around the private dining room. I stood there with my hands awkwardly empty, my heels sinking into the plush carpeting like I was being swallowed. No one noticed. Or they did, and didn't care. My mother clinked her glass against Robert's and offered that practiced political smile, the one that curled up at the corners but never reached her eyes. She didn't even glance my way. The photo frame had been cold in my hand all night. Now it was gone, filed away in some assistant's bag, or maybe already forgotten on a credenza. My father hadn't asked about it, hadn't asked why I chose that particular moment. Law school graduation. The day I thought he was proud of me. I guess I should have known better. Pride was reserved for Brandon now. The table was dressed in the finest linen. Every wine glass sparkled under the glow of the overhead chandelier. There were name cards, golden flatware, and a two-tiered birthday cake shaped like the Capitol building. Typical Carter flair. Legacy over intimacy. I had arrived on time, holding that frame like a peace offering. I wore navy, a color my mother had always said brought out my eyes. But she didn't notice that either. She was too busy adjusting Brandon's tie before he took the floor for his toast. "Dad," Brandon had said, glass raised. "You taught me that image is everything. That to lead is to be seen, respected. I hope to carry that forward. For our name." Cheers erupted. Someone at the end of the table actually stood up to applaud. My father beamed, placing a hand over his chest like Brandon had just announced a presidential run. I bit down hard, tasted metal. Every camera in the room, all 6 of them, turned toward Brandon and Robert. I saw the flash of a lens tilt my way, only to swivel away when it became clear I wasn't the subject. Just the forgotten daughter standing in the background like a shadow too polite to disappear. I forced a smile and stood when the servers brought out the dessert. Bourbon bread pudding, my father's favorite. He leaned over to Brandon and whispered something. Brandon laughed, loud and clean and proud. I wanted to scream, but I only smiled tighter. The laughter faded into clinks and murmurs as dessert plates were cleared. I stood and excused myself. No one stopped me. No one asked where I was going. Not even my mother, who hadn't said a word to me since I arrived. The cold March wind slapped my face as I pushed open the door. I didn't stop walking until I reached my car 3 blocks away, the only spot I could afford without valet. My hands trembled as I opened the door and slid into the driver's seat. And there it was. The photo. Still sitting on the passenger seat. Exactly where I'd set it after pulling it from my tote bag inside. I hadn't even brought it in. My father never touched it. The one in the restaurant? It was a different frame. A decoy. I didn't know why I'd done that. Maybe I wanted to test him. Maybe I already knew the answer. I stared at the image. Me in my cap and gown, Robert's arm around my shoulder, his smile looking real. That day, I thought I'd made him proud, that I'd clawed my way into his world with merit, with law, with something clean. But tonight made it clear. That photo wasn't about me. It never had been. It was about image, legacy, the Carter name. And now, Brandon was the only image that mattered. My phone buzzed. I didn't look right away. I just sat, hands stiff on my lap, letting the cold creep in. The streetlights smeared through the windshield like tears I hadn't shed. Finally, I picked up the phone. A text from Brandon. "Don't be so dramatic next time. We were just celebrating, not ignoring you." Dramatic. I looked back at the photo, at the girl in the frame who thought she mattered. "Maybe it's time they miss me for real," I whispered, and started the engine. When justice shut its doors, I moved to a place where justice had never knocked. Claremont didn't show up on most maps unless you zoomed in. It sat quietly near the Missouri border, a speck of stubborn land with more silos than stoplights. The kind of town where last names mattered more than resumes, and everyone assumed you were either running from something or born in the mud. I was both. They knew me here as Vera Lang, just another out-of-towner who rented the room above O'Malley's bookshop and walked to the library each morning in worn boots and a secondhand coat. I shelved books, cataloged donations, and kept my head low. No phone, no social media, no Carter, no Maddie. That name didn't belong to me anymore. The room was small, single bed, chipped desk, a window that looked out onto a roof thick with bird droppings. But it was mine. In the bottom drawer, under loose papers and a paperback copy of Baldwin's The Fire Next Time, I found my old journal. The first page still held the line I wrote when I was 16. "The loudest revolutions begin with silence." I hadn't touched that journal in years. Now I carried it with me everywhere. At the library, I kept my voice low, my movements gentle. I let the world blur past me. The mothers wrangling toddlers, the retirees with their crossword books, the teens whispering behind graphic novels. Most ignored me, which was perfect. The ones who didn't were twofold. Curious or broken. Both made me nervous. Eli Morgan was the curious kind. He taught American Lit at the high school and borrowed novels the way some people inhaled oxygen. He started noticing things. The way I corrected Dewey Decimal errors without needing a manual. How I shelved books in legal nonfiction by landmark case rather than author. How I paused too long over titles about whistleblowers and constitutional law. "You used to work in policy?" he asked one afternoon casually, as if he were asking whether I liked coffee. I smiled, polite but guarded. "I used to think change was possible. Now I shelve books." He didn't press, but later that week he left a sticky note in a People's History of the United States. Some people shelve books. Others rewrite them. I kept it in my journal. Claremont had a tiny nonprofit called Farm Justice, mostly retirees and community organizers who fought for ethical land use and better working conditions. Their latest letter to the state legislature was riddled with emotional pleas but zero policy grounding. I rewrote it anonymously and dropped it into their mailbox, signed only Senator V. It was efficient, technical, and compelling. And it worked. Within 2 weeks, a minor but quietly cruel bill, HB 742, which would have cut environmental protections for migrant farming zones, was tabled indefinitely. Governor Wilkins had backed it. That night, I watched the news from the back of the bookstore, one hand cradling tea, the other tracing the frayed edge of my journal. The reporter said unexpected citizen advocacy had disrupted the vote. I didn't smile, but I didn't flinch either. 2 days later, I got an email. Well, Vera got it. The subject line read, "Quiet pen, loud echo." The body was short. "I think you wrote this. Let's talk." Signed, Monica Trin, Midwest correspondent, People First Network. I didn't reply. That afternoon, Eli approached me with a book on constitutional crises. "Out of curiosity," he said, "you ever think of going back to whatever it is you were running from?" "I'm not running," I said, "just writing from farther away." He nodded. I figured. It should have scared me how transparent I was becoming, but Eli didn't seem like the type to chase ghosts. He just left a copy of the Federalist Papers on the front desk and asked me to return it when I was done. No due date. That night, a familiar vibration buzzed in my jacket pocket. The number was blocked, but I didn't need caller ID. The preview of the message said it all. Governor's team scrambling over a surprise policy takedown. Kinda reminds me of your writing. Brandon. My fingers tightened around the phone. My journal lay open beside me on the desk, the first page glowing faintly under lamplight. They still remembered my words. And maybe, just maybe, it was time I stopped forgetting them too. He looked at me like he'd seen a ghost. Or worse, someone he owed. The Landmark Hotel glittered like a cathedral to ambition. Golden lighting, floor-to-ceiling glass, and the soft hum of string quartets playing music no one really listened to. Des Moines' elite moved like well-oiled gears across the marble floor. Politicians, donors, media heads. They laughed too loudly, drank too carefully, and smiled with teeth but not with eyes. Brandon had insisted I come. "It'll be good for optics," he'd said, slipping me a spare invitation as if it were a dinner menu and not a rope to a gallows. The card read, M. Carter +1. Nothing more. I wore black, not flashy but tailored, and tied my hair up tight like armor. I didn't want to be recognized. I just wanted to watch. But the world never let a Carter go unnoticed for long. Brandon beamed as we entered. He waved to a few aides, shook hands with some minor appointees, then disappeared into a knot of rising stars near the bar. I drifted to the edges, where the servers moved in quiet precision and no one cared to ask my name. But then I spoke. An older man near the hors d'oeuvres table had made a flippant remark about incarceration reform being too soft. I couldn't help myself. "Punishing illness is not reform," I said, voice calm but edged. "It's surrender." His laugh died mid-breath. He blinked. I've heard that before. Of course he had. It was a line I wrote for a memo 5 years ago. Governor Wilkins quoted it on live radio back when he was still pretending to care about compassion. I turned and found him now, standing no more than 10 feet away. Grant Wilkins, all gleam and posture. His eyes scanned the room like a hawk circling a carcass. Then they landed on me. He froze. Not dramatically, just long enough to be noticed. His mouth moved before his feet. "Excuse me," he said to no one in particular. And then he was in front of me. Up close, his charisma cracked a little. The eyes were too sharp, the smile too rehearsed. He tilted his head. "Are you," he asked, voice low, "the senator?" Around us, the gala continued, laughter, glasses clinking, heels tapping. But in that moment, all of it blurred. I didn't blink. I didn't run. I raised my glass. "You never needed to know my name to follow the truth," I said, voice steady. "But now you do." His lips parted. No words, just silence, as if I'd stolen the wind from his lungs. Somewhere behind him, a sharp breath escaped. I looked past his shoulder. Haley Rhodes. Her auburn hair was shorter now, but I'd know that face anywhere. We used to share deadlines and coffee spoons. She used to call me mad when no one else dared. Now she just stared, eyes narrowed, mouth a thin line. She turned away before I could speak, pulled her phone from her clutch, and typed fast. Across the room, a staffer's phone lit up. The preview banner was unmistakable. Dig everything on Senator V tonight. I felt the quake before it hit. My anonymity, my shields was cracking. But I didn't flinch. I sipped my drink. The war had begun. They didn't destroy me with the truth. They used distortion and hoped I'd stay silent out of shame. The first notification came at 6:42 a.m., a headline blinking across my lock screen like a flare in fog. Senator V exposed. Was she fired for misconduct? I didn't open the article. I knew better. The second alert came minutes later. This one from Brandon. You need to get ahead of this, whatever this is. By noon, the smear had matured into a full-blown storm. Every major local outlet ran with some variation of the same story. Anonymous sources claimed I had been dismissed from a policy advisory role 2 years ago for unauthorized leaks. Screenshots of internal emails surfaced, out of context, scrubbed and altered just enough to shift the meaning. One even had my signature on it. But it wasn't mine. The deepfake came next. A clipped video where my voice, warped just slightly, read a set of lines about undermining Wilkins's integrity for political revenge. It was a botched Frankenstein of various recorded memos I'd drafted, repurposed to make me look like a bitter saboteur. Haley's hand was all over this. It was precise, nasty, almost surgical, and Eli saw it. He showed up on my porch in Claremont that evening. His face was pale, his eyes raw from lack of sleep. Is it true? He asked, holding up his phone. The screen showed a paused video. My blurred face, lips moving in uncanny sync. I couldn't meet his eyes. I didn't say those words, I said. Not in that order. Not with that intent. His brow furrowed. But the emails? Fabricated, I snapped. Manipulated. You know I wouldn't. I thought I knew. He interrupted, stepping back. That pause, that inch of distance, cut deeper than the headlines. I just need time, he said softly, then turned and walked away without waiting for a reply. The door shut behind him like a gavel. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I opened my laptop. Monica had sent a message the day before. Coffee? Now I showed up at her apartment with a USB drive and a list of the file names from the alleged leaks. We sat at her cluttered kitchen table, she in a sweatshirt, I still in yesterday's blazer. The coffee turned cold between us. Monica scrolled silently through file metadata, her brow furrowed. Look, she murmured, these draft files? Their creation timestamps are after the publication dates. What does that mean? I leaned forward. It means someone edited them to look like you wrote them. But the digital fingerprint says otherwise. The system logged a different user ID. She clicked. I saw the name. HRHODESADMIN. My lungs froze. We stared at each other, neither speaking. Monica slid her chair back. I need more, but this? She tapped the screen. This is a start. I nodded, slowly. Later that night, I sat alone in my room above the bookstore. Outside, the wind rustled through the trees of Claremont like whispers I couldn't chase. I pulled the file back up. The receipt Monica had printed was still on my desk. A system log showing Haley accessing the original draft hours before the so-called leak occurred. They hadn't just twisted my words. They had stolen them, warped them, weaponized them. I stared at the screen and whispered, it's not just sabotage. It's theft. If they weaponize lies, I'd let the truth detonate. The Claremont Public Library didn't look like a courtroom, but that morning it felt like one. Rows of folding chairs filled the small auditorium, wedged between the biography section and a forgotten local history exhibit. A podium stood in front of the projector screen, modest and unthreatening. The kind of place where townspeople usually hosted poetry readings or book clubs. But today, it was a reckoning. I stood behind the podium in a gray suit, plain, pressed, unapologetic. The room wasn't packed, but it was watched. Local reporters flanked by community members with arms crossed or hands clasped. A few students with phones already recording. At the back of the room, just beneath the dim light of the projector fan, Eli sat with a copy of Invisible Man on his lap. Closed, unread. Monica gave me a nod from stage left. Her laptop balanced on one knee, a folder marked Trin V. Rhodes, draft, resting at her feet. I cleared my throat and clicked the remote. Slide 1. A still frame of Governor Wilkins from his 2021 campaign trail. His quote hovered above. Punishing illness is not reform, it's surrender. He'd praised the memo that line came from. He didn't know I wrote it, until now. I used to think truth lived in sealed courtrooms and official memos, I began. But truth isn't always dignified. Sometimes it's hacked, distorted, framed, and still out as it survives. The next slide mapped a timeline. March 2024. Email sent. Metadata manipulated. User logins from Haley's admin credentials. A date circled in red, the same day the smear campaign began. Another click. An audio clip played. Scratchy but clear. Haley's voice exasperated. She'll never claw back from this. That's the point. There was no mistaking her. No amount of spin could bury that tone. I paused. The room had gone still. She was right about one thing, I said quietly. Clawing back wasn't the goal. Rebuilding was. I stepped away from the slides. For those asking if Senator V was a persona, it wasn't a disguise. It was a survival strategy. A necessity. Because when your own name becomes a weapon, sometimes you have to write the truth under another. A murmur ran through the crowd. Not skepticism. Curiosity. Reconsideration. I looked up. Cameras red-eyed. Phones tilted. This isn't just about me, I added. It's about what happens when power decides whose voice matters. When systems fail, we don't disappear. We adapt. Applause didn't erupt, but it didn't need to. The silence that followed was reverent, like the space left after a verdict is read. After the Q&A, brief, calm, pointed, Monica joined me at the side of the stage. They're already fact-checking in real time, she whispered, and Haley's team just pulled their Twitter down. I smiled without teeth. That afternoon, Governor Wilkins released a public statement. We regret the internal failures that led to this. Our administration is committed to transparency moving forward. Haley Rhodes resigned the next morning. I didn't watch the press conference. I didn't need to. Back in my room above the bookstore, I unpacked the tote bag someone had handed me before I left the library. Inside was a worn paperback. To Kill a Mockingbird. A note was tucked between the pages, scribbled on the back of a receipt. I believe you now. E. I closed the book slowly, the note still in my hand. Some records can't be deleted, and some truths, once spoken aloud, become louder than lies ever could. I was never the future they wanted, so I became the future they'd have to live with. The banners were simple. White fabric, navy text, the V Project, legal literacy, civic power, real voices, no fanfare, no podium flanked by officials, just a circle of folding chairs beneath budding oaks on the campus quad of Claremont Community College. I stood in the center, jeans, blazer, sneakers, no script, no title plate, just my name, finally whole. A crowd of students sat in front of me, some eager, some skeptical, a few just curious. Scattered among them were familiar faces. Monica in sunglasses, quietly filming. Malik by the coffee table, laughing with a returning citizen named Jerome. And Eli, arms crossed, leaning against the base of a tree, nodding as I began. When systems fail us, I said, we don't disappear. We rewire them. I let the silence breathe. The wind rustled through the trees, carrying the scent of newly cut grass and chalk dust. The kind of scent you only notice when you finally slowed down. I used to think you needed power to speak, I continued. Turns out, speaking is power. They listened. Not because I was a Carter or a senator or a ghost from a scandal. They listened because the words weren't about me anymore. They were about them, about what came next. Later, after the talk, I sat in my new office, a small converted study room at the back of the library building. It had no lock, just an open door and a mismatched rug. Behind my desk stood a single photo frame, the one I once handed my father. Except now, the photo had changed. I was still in the cap and gown, but alone this time. Brandon cropped out. Robert never pictured. I was smiling. It had arrived in the mail the week before. No note, no return address. Just a plain envelope with the photo inside, fully restored. I knew who sent it, and I didn't need to know why. Some silences finally stopped hurting. That afternoon, Malik knocked gently and handed me our first donation check. For the senator who didn't wait to be elected. He read off the memo line, grinning. We both laughed. Outside, the sky had softened to gold. Students lingered on benches. A group of teen girls were taking photos in front of the V Project banner. Eli joined me on the walkway, his sleeves rolled up, expression easy. "You think this sticks?" he asked. "It already has," I said. He looked out over the field. "Some justice doesn't wear robes." "No," I said. "Sometimes it wears sneakers and carries a library card." As we turned the corner, a girl about 11 ran up, eyes wide, clutching a notebook. "Excuse me," she said breathlessly. "Can I be Senator V too?" I knelt slightly to meet her eyes. "You already are." They tried to erase her with silence and smear her with lies, but she rewrote the narrative, not with vengeance, but with clarity and conviction. What they mistook for surrender was, in truth, recalibration, a storm gathering in stillness. Justice did not arrive on a gavel strike, but through a woman who refused to disappear. Like the final chord of a long-forgotten melody, justice may arrive late, but it resonates powerfully once it's heard. And sometimes the most lasting verdict is the one delivered not in courtrooms, but in classrooms, banners, and the next voice that dares to rise.